For 6 years, the Korean Mafia boss secretly protected his black wife without her ever knowing. Every morning, someone made sure the street outside her building was safe. Every night, someone made sure no one could get close enough to hurt her. She thought the city had simply gotten kinder. It hadn't. Then one night, she took off her wedding ring, placed it in his hand, and said 8 words that shattered the only thing the Mafia boss had never been able to control. "I hope she loves you more than I did." He thought she meant another woman. She didn't. She meant the version of him that actually knew how to tell the truth. What Michelle didn't know was that before sunrise, men from a rival syndicate were already moving to kill her, and the only people standing between her and death were the same bodyguards she'd spent 6 years begging her husband to stop sending. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Soo-yin sat in the back of a black car outside a building he wasn't supposed to be watching and gave an order that would keep his wife safe without her ever knowing his name was attached to it. 2 men, rotating shifts. She doesn't see them, he said. So-ji-ho didn't look up from his phone. She'll ask questions if she does. Then make sure she doesn't. The car pulled away from the curb before Michelle even stepped outside. That was how it worked. Han moved pieces around her life like weather she'd never feel, only see the results of. A parking spot that stayed open, a troublesome tenant who suddenly left her building, a man who followed her for 3 blocks last spring and simply stopped showing up. She thought the world had gotten kinder to her. It hadn't. Han had gotten more careful. At home, the lights were already low when he walked in, and Michelle was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of her, a pen tapping against her knee. She didn't look up right away. "You're late," she said. "Work. It's always work." He set his keys down harder than he meant to. She noticed. She always noticed things like that, the small tells he thought he'd trained out of himself years ago. "What are you signing?" he asked. "Lease papers. For the center." He came around the table to look, and she slid the papers 1/2 inch away from him. Not enough to be rude, just enough to say, "This one's mine." His jaw tightened, though his voice stayed even. "I told you I'd cover the deposit. I know what you told me." "Michelle, I got a small business loan." She finally looked at him. "It's not a lot, but it's mine. I signed my own name on it. Nobody else's." He wanted to ask why that mattered so much when he had more money than she'd ever need, but some part of him already understood, even if he didn't want to. She wasn't trying to save money. She was trying to prove she still existed outside of him. "That's good," he said instead, and meant it, even though it cost him something to say. She studied him a second too long, like she was waiting for the other half of the sentence, the part where he'd offer to help anyway, the part where he couldn't just let her have this one thing without circling back into it. When it didn't come, something in her shoulders eased, just slightly. Later that night, her sister Grace called while Michelle was washing dishes, phone propped against the window. "You still haven't told him you're thinking about the separation," Grace said. Not a question. "I don't know if I am. Thinking about it, I mean." "Michelle, I love him, Grace." "I didn't ask if you loved him." Michelle turned the water off. In the sudden quiet, she could hear Han's footsteps upstairs, slow and even. The sound of a man, pacing through a phone call he wouldn't let her hear either. "He still won't tell me anything," Michelle said quietly. "Not what he does, not who he talks to at 2 in the morning, not why his hands shake sometimes when he thinks I'm asleep. Because he's protecting you." "From what?" "He never says, he just decides, for both of us, every time." Grace didn't answer right away, and that silence said more than a lecture would have. Upstairs, Han ended his call and sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment before going back down. He told himself it was nothing she needed to know. A rival syndicate had been asking questions about her routine, her building, her sister. Nothing that couldn't be handled quietly. Nothing worth frightening her over. He believed that the way he believed most things now. Completely, and without asking if it was actually true. or just easier. When he came back into the kitchen, Michelle was drying her hands on a towel, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Someone followed me today," she said. "Twice. I noticed the same car near the studio, then again near the house." His stomach dropped, though his face didn't move. "Probably nothing. You always say that. Because it's usually true. Usually isn't always." She folded the towel and set it down slowly. "Han, look at me. Are you having someone watch me?" The question landed in the space between them, like something dropped from a height, and for a second, neither of them moved. "I'm keeping you safe," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've been keeping me safe since the day I married you. I still don't know from what. You don't need to know. I'm your wife, not your asset." The word landed hard, and he flinched, though he covered it fast, the way he covered everything. She saw it anyway. She always did. "I have never once treated you like... You just don't tell me things. You don't ask me things. You decide, and I live inside the decision." Her voice wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was steady. "I signed a lease today without your money, because I wanted one thing in my life that was only mine. Do you understand how sad that is? That I had to fight for one small thing." He opened his mouth, and nothing useful came out, because the truth sitting behind his teeth would only make it worse. A rival syndicate, a dead journalist who wasn't as dead as he'd once believed. Her father's case, still breathing somewhere in a file he'd spent years trying to bury. None of it was safe to say out loud, not even to her, especially not to her. So he said nothing, and the nothing became its own answer. Michelle reached up and slid her wedding ring off her finger, slow enough that he had time to stop her and didn't. She set it in his palm and closed his fingers around it herself. "I hope she loves you more than I did," she said. "There's no one else." "I didn't mean another woman, Han." Her eyes were wet, but her voice held. "I meant whoever you become next. I hope she gets the version of you that actually lets her in." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair and walked out before he could find a single word worth saying, and the door closing behind her was quieter than either of them expected, given everything it carried. Han stood in the kitchen with the ring warm in his fist for a long time before his phone rang again. Seo Ji-ho's name lit up the screen, and something in the timing made his chest go cold before he even answered. "They know she's alone tonight," Seo Ji-ho said. "The Baek Syndicate, they're moving before sunrise." Han's grip tightened around the ring still warm from Michelle's hand. "Where?" "Her building. They're watching the exit now." Seo Ji-ho's voice stayed flat, the way it always did when the stakes were highest. "You want this handled quiet, or you want it handled fast? You don't get both tonight. Quiet enough that she never knows my name is on it. Fast enough that nothing happens to her. You can't have both, Han. Not this time." Han was already moving toward the door. "Make it both. That's an order, not a request." Michelle didn't know any of it. She sat in her car 3 blocks from the house, hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere yet, just breathing. She'd expected to feel free the second she left. Instead, she felt like she'd stepped off a ledge without checking how far down the ground was. Her phone buzzed. "Grace." "You did it," Grace said, not quite a question. "I did it." "How do you feel?" Michelle looked at her bare hand on the steering wheel, the pale line where the ring used to sit. "Like I finally exhaled after holding my breath for 6 years." "That's good." "It's terrifying." 2 men in a dark sedan pulled up along the curb behind her, far enough back that she didn't notice them, close enough that if the car door across the street had opened the way it almost did, they'd have been out of their seats before the man reached her. She drove home to her sister's without ever knowing how close that moment came, or whose money was paying for the men who made sure it never did. By morning, the arts center existed only on paper and hope, a lease and an empty room with bad lighting and good bones. Michelle stood in the middle of it, arms crossed, trying to see past the water stains and the smell of old paint. "You're going to need a lot more than hope," Grace said, walking the perimeter with her arms out like she was measuring the walls with her body. I have hope and a loan. That's the whole budget. When does it open? 3 weeks. If I can find enough donors who don't ask what I did to deserve this much bad luck. Grace stopped walking. Speaking of luck, someone reached out to me yesterday. Journalist. Says his name is Daniel Park. Michelle's face didn't change right away, which told Grace more than words would have. Dad's case had a journalist. Years ago, he disappeared before anything came of it. This one says he didn't disappear, says he's been quiet a long time, because staying quiet kept him alive. Grace watched her sister carefully. He wants to talk, says he has something about Dad's death that never made it into any report. Do you believe him? I believe he's scared enough that he waited years to call. That's not nothing. Michelle turned back to the empty room, the peeling paint, the future she was trying to build with her own 2 hands instead of borrowed safety. Not now, Grace. I can't carry 2 ghosts at once. Let me open this place first. She didn't know that opening it would be the thing that pulled the second ghost straight to her door. Han heard about the police detail Michelle turned down before he heard about anything else that week. She refused protection, Seo Ji-ho told him, setting a folder on the desk Han hadn't sat behind in 3 days. Detective offered a patrol car near the center. She said no, said, in her words, she's done needing men with guns to feel safe. She's not wrong to want that. Han didn't look up. She's wrong if it gets her killed. Seo Ji-ho lowered his voice. People are noticing you're distracted, Han. The Beck situation isn't closed. It's paused, and pause looks like weakness to men who are already circling. You spend your nights worrying about a woman who left you, and your organization reads that as a man who's lost his nerve. Then let them read it wrong. They won't. Seo Ji-ho hesitated, which he rarely did. I'll keep 2 men on her rotation, unmarked. She'll never make them. But Han, I need you present here too. Both wars can't be won by half a man. Han finally looked up. Then don't lose either one for me. The center opened on a gray Saturday with folding chairs, donated paint, and 40 children who showed up because their mothers heard a rumor that someone was finally building something for them instead of asking something of them. Michelle stood at the door, greeting every single one like she'd been waiting her whole life for exactly this, because in a way, she had. What she didn't know was that the wire transfer covering the insurance she couldn't afford had no name attached to it, only a number Grace would later trace back through 6 shell accounts before hitting a wall Han built specifically so it couldn't be followed. Michelle believed the center survived because the community showed up for her. It survived because a man across the city refused to let it fail, even after she'd told him she didn't need him. That night, after the last child left and the lights went out, a car idled across the street for longer than it should have. 2 men got out. Michelle was locking the front door when she heard the scuffle behind her, fast and quiet, over before she'd fully turned around. By the time she saw anything, the 2 men were running, and 2 strangers in dark jackets were already gone, swallowed by the same shadows they'd come from. "Are you all right?" a neighbor called from across the street. "I'm fine," Michelle said, though her hands were shaking. "I don't know what that was." She told herself it was nothing, random, the city being the city. She didn't see the man standing beneath the awning of the shuttered shop across the road, rain sliding down the back of his collar, watching her through the window until she disappeared safely inside. He didn't move until her lights went out upstairs. Then he got in his car and drove away without ever being seen. 3 days later, Grace sat across from a man she'd never met in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and nerves. Daniel Park looked older than his photographs, the kind of older that comes from hiding rather than aging. "I didn't disappear," he said, sliding an envelope halfway across the table, not releasing it yet. "Someone helped me disappear. Someone I never identified. I've spent 6 years finding out who ordered it and why, and I finally have enough to prove it." "Prove what, exactly?" Daniel let go of the envelope. "That the man your sister married didn't just fail to stop what happened to your father. He made sure nobody ever found out the truth." Grace opened the envelope with hands that had gone very still, and the photograph inside answered a question she hadn't let herself ask out loud in 6 years. The photograph showed a man's hand passing an envelope across a table much like the one Grace was sitting at now, except the man in the picture had Han's face and Han's watch, and Han's habit of angling his body away from any camera he knew was there. "Where did you get this?" Grace's voice came out steadier than she felt. "A contact inside the syndicate who owed me a favor before he died of natural causes nobody believed were natural." Daniel tapped the edge of the photo. "That's Han. 6 years ago, paying off the man who made me disappear. Not killed, disappeared. There's a difference, and I spent a long time being grateful for it before I understood why he bothered. Why did he bother? Because dead journalists get investigated. Missing ones get forgotten." Daniel's jaw worked. He needed me gone, not dead. Gone doesn't ask questions. Grace slid the photograph back toward him, though her hand didn't want to let go of it either. "Michelle needs to see this. I was hoping you'd say that instead of telling me to disappear again. I'm not protecting him, Daniel. I never did." She stood, gathering her coat. "But I need you to understand something. Whatever he did, my sister loved that man enough to spend 6 years hoping he'd let her in. This isn't going to just make her angry. It's going to break something in her that already had cracks in it." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm not looking to break her. I'm looking for the truth. If those turn out to be the same thing, that's not mine to apologize for." Michelle read the photograph the way people read test results they already suspect are bad, slow enough to delay the moment the words become real. Grace sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where Michelle had signed her lease 3 weeks earlier, the same table where she'd taken off her ring. "Say something," Grace said gently. "What is there to say? He made a journalist disappear over my father's death and never told me." Michelle's hands were flat on the table, pressing down like she needed something solid under her. 6 years, Grace. 6 years of him telling me he was protecting me from a world I couldn't understand, and this is what he meant. You don't know the whole story yet. I know enough, but even as she said it, something in her chest refused to close the door all the way. She thought of him standing in the kitchen, with her ring in his fist, saying nothing, because saying anything true would have meant saying this. Her phone buzzed. Han. She stared at it until it stopped ringing, then started again. She answered, "You have 30 seconds. I need to see you. Tonight. There's something I should have told you a long time ago." "I already know, Han." Silence stretched long enough that she almost hung up. "Then you know I need to explain it myself," he said quietly. "Not let you learn the rest of it from someone who wants me destroyed. Before you find out whether Michelle lets him through that door, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Because what Han says next will change everything between them." He arrived within the hour, and for the first time since she'd left, Michelle let him inside without deciding in advance whether that was forgiveness or just curiosity wearing forgiveness's coat. He stood in her sister's living room, like a man who'd rehearsed this 100 times and forgotten every version the second he saw her face. "Say it," she said. "All of it. No version where you come out looking like the man who had no choice." Han's hands were steady when he needed them steady for anything else in his life. They weren't steady now. "There was a journalist investigating your father's death. Daniel Park. I believed he was close to something that would have exposed you to the same people who killed your father. So I had him removed from Seoul before he could finish the story." Removed? Paid to disappear, given a new identity, enough money to start over somewhere they couldn't find him. I never wanted him dead. I wanted you alive. His voice cracked on the last word in a way she'd never heard from him, not once in 6 years of marriage. "I thought if the truth came out, the syndicate hunting your family would have come for you next. I made a choice to bury a story instead of bury you." "You didn't ask me." "I couldn't ask you. Telling you would have meant explaining why, and the why would have put you in exactly the danger I was trying to keep from you. So instead, you decided for both of us. Again." Michelle's voice didn't rise, and somehow that was worse than shouting. "You've been carrying this for 6 years, sleeping next to me, building a whole marriage on top of it. Every day. And you never once thought I deserved to choose what risk I was willing to live with? Han had no answer that didn't sound like the same excuse dressed in new words, and for once he didn't try to find one. He simply stood there, a man who controlled an empire and couldn't control the one silence that mattered most. I hated who I had to become to protect you, he said finally. I told myself the ends justified it. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. That's not an apology. I don't know how to apologize for something I'd do again if I thought it would keep you breathing. Michelle felt something in her chest give way, not softening toward him, but breaking cleanly from him, the last thread that had kept her half hoping snapping under its own weight. Then we don't have anything left to build on. You'd still choose to lie to me if you thought it was safer. That's not love, Han. That's ownership with better manners. Michelle, get out. He left without arguing, because for the first time in his life, he understood he'd lost an argument by finally telling the truth instead of by hiding it. Miles away, in a room with no windows and men who'd sworn loyalty to him for a decade, Seo Ji-ho sat at the head of a table he wasn't supposed to be leading, listening to rival voices question whether Han Soo-yin still deserved to hold the syndicate at all. He's distracted by a woman who already left him, one voice said. Distracted men make dangerous mistakes, mistakes that cost the rest of us. He built this organization, Seo Ji-ho said carefully, buying time he didn't yet know how to spend. And now he's unbuilding it one bad decision at a time. The vote was called before Seo Ji-ho could stop it, and when it ended, the terms were simple and merciless. Han would prove his loyalty by severing every remaining connection to Michelle Andrews, permanently, or he would be removed from power the same way he'd once removed men who threatened him. Seo Ji-ho left the meeting already knowing which choice Han would refuse to make, and already knowing what that refusal would cost them both. Han heard the terms from Seo Ji-ho's mouth and felt nothing move in his chest, which told him everything he needed to know about his answer. Say it back to me, Han said, so I know I heard it right. Cut every tie to Michelle Andrews, permanently, or they remove you the way you once removed men who crossed you. Seo Ji-ho's voice was careful, the voice of a man delivering news he already regretted. I bought you time by not arguing in the room. That's the only gift I had left to give. I already lost her, Ji-ho. Cutting a tie that doesn't exist anymore isn't a sacrifice. It's a lie dressed up as loyalty. They don't want the truth. They want the performance of loyalty. Give them that, and you keep everything. Han looked at the ring still sitting in a small dish on his desk, the one place in the house he still let himself look at it. I spent 6 years giving performances instead of truth. Look what it cost me. It'll cost you your life this time. Then it costs me my life. Han stood, and something in the set of his shoulders had changed since the night Michelle removed her ring, something that no longer needed a room full of feared men to feel like it mattered. Refuse the vote, publicly. I want them to hear it from me, not through you. Seo Ji-ho studied him a long moment, the loyalty of a decade weighing against the plain math of survival. You understand what happens next. I understand exactly what happens next. Then I'm choosing you, Seo Ji-ho said quietly, which means I'm choosing the losing side. I hope you're worth it, Han. I hope so too. Across the city, Michelle sat with Daniel and Grace in a small office that smelled like paper and old coffee, staring at a folder that could end a criminal empire or end her completely, depending on which way she chose to read it. If I help you, Michelle said slowly, he goes down with it. Whatever happens to the syndicate happens to him too. That's the truth of it, Daniel said. I won't pretend otherwise. I hated him 3 days ago. Michelle turned a page without reading it. I'm not sure hate and helping destroy someone are supposed to feel this complicated. They're not supposed to feel simple, Grace said. Nothing about loving someone dangerous ever is. Michelle closed the folder. Release only what proves the syndicate's crimes. Not everything Han ever did trying to protect me. There's a difference between exposing a criminal organization and destroying one man's chance to become something better than what he was. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. I can work with that. Grace's phone buzzed before anyone could say more. A text from a contact inside the prosecutor's office, warning that violence had already broken out near the Harbor District. Syndicate loyalists moving against Seo Ji-ho's men in the first open clash the city had seen in years. Michelle felt the floor tilt slightly under a chair that hadn't moved. Before anyone finds out whether Han survives the night, tell me where you're tuning in from tonight, because everything is about to collide at once. Gunfire and grief moved through Seoul's backstreets in a way that hadn't happened in a decade. Syndicate loyalists hunting a man who used to be untouchable, now protected by nothing but a handful of men who chose him over their own safety. Han didn't run. He didn't fight back either, not the way anyone expected. Instead, he sat with a laptop and 6 years of financial records and began sending them, one encrypted file at a time, to the one prosecutor in Seoul who'd never taken a bribe from anyone in the organization. You're giving it all away, Seo Ji-ho said, watching over his shoulder, a bandage already darkening on his arm from a fight an hour earlier. Everything you built. I built an empire out of fear, because I was afraid of losing people, Han said, not looking up. It cost me the one person I couldn't stand to lose. I'm done building things that only work because people are scared of me. Michelle arrived an hour later, past men Seo Ji-ho let through only because he recognized her face from every photograph Han had never let anyone see, and found Han still sending files, hands steady now in a way they hadn't been in her sister's living room. You're destroying yourself, she said from the doorway. I'm destroying the version of myself that thought protecting you meant lying to you. He finally looked up. There are families 3 streets from here, still trapped inside syndicate debts. Children who'll inherit fear the same way I did if someone doesn't stop it now. I can't fix what I did to us. I can try to fix this. Something in Michelle loosened that she hadn't expected to loosen. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized a man finally choosing truth when lying would have been so much easier. There are 3 families 2 blocks over, she said. Trapped in a building the syndicate controls. Grace already has legal protection ready, if we can get them out tonight. Han stood without hesitation. Then let's get them out. They moved together through the chaos that night, Han giving away leverage and power at every turn, Michelle guiding frightened families toward the safety Grace had arranged, neither of them speaking about the 6 years between them, because there wasn't time, and because for the first time, actions were saying what words never had. Near dawn, in an empty room that used to be Han's office, he fed the syndicate's original ledger into a small fire, watching a decade of fear-built power turn to ash by his own hand. Michelle stood beside him, and when his hand trembled slightly at the sight of everything ending, she reached over and took it, quiet and certain, the first time she'd touched him since the night she walked out. Neither of them said anything, neither of them needed to. 3 days later, in the hushed hallway outside the courtroom where Han was scheduled to testify against everything he'd built, Michelle stood beside him, straightening his collar, with hands that no longer shook the way they had in her sister's kitchen. After this, we start over, she said. Slowly, honestly, if that's still something you want. It's the only thing I want. A man in a plain gray coat walked through the courthouse doors behind them, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on Han, with the particular stillness of someone who hadn't come to watch a trial. Michelle saw the man's stillness before she understood what it meant, and by the time she grabbed Han's arm, it was already too late to simply walk away. "Get down!" Seo Ji-ho's voice cut through the hallway from somewhere behind them, and then he was moving, faster than a man with a bandaged arm should have been able to move, putting himself between Han and the man in the gray coat a half-second before the first shot. The sound that followed would stay with Michelle longer than almost anything else in her life, sharp and final and wrong in a building meant for justice instead of violence. Seo Ji-ho went down hard, and Han was on his knees beside him before anyone else in the hallway had finished reacting, hands pressing uselessly against a wound that both of them already understood wasn't survivable. "You didn't have to," Han said, voice breaking apart in a way Michelle had only heard once before, the night he confessed everything and lost her because of it. "Somebody had to choose you for once," Seo Ji-ho said, blood at the corner of his mouth, instead of the Empire. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. 10 years of loyalty had already said it. Han testified 3 hours later anyway, because Seo Ji-ho's last act would have meant nothing if the truth died in that hallway with him. He sat in the witness chair and gave away the last pieces of the world he'd built, every account, every name, every operation, until there was nothing left of the syndicate but court records and grieving families finally free to grieve without fear. Michelle sat in the gallery through all of it, and when the prosecutor asked Han why he was cooperating fully instead of protecting what remained of his freedom, his answer wasn't rehearsed. "Because I spent years believing love meant controlling every danger around the people I cared about," he said. "I finally understand it means giving them the truth and trusting them to decide what to do with it, even when the truth costs me everything." Michelle didn't leave the gallery, not once. Han lost his empire, his fortune, and 18 months of his freedom in a negotiated sentence that reflected both his crimes and everything his testimony had dismantled. Michelle visited when the rules allowed it, not out of obligation, but because somewhere in the wreckage of that courthouse hallway, she'd stopped measuring her love for him by how safe it felt. Grace spent those months rebuilding what the syndicate had broken, one family, one legal case at a time, finally understanding that some things the law alone could never fix, only stand beside. Daniel published exactly what he promised. No more. Protecting the innocent even as he finished what 6 years of hiding had cost him to pursue. The Arts Center grew without anyone's hidden money propping it up, funded openly now by a city that had watched a woman refuse to disappear into anyone else's shadow. It became a foundation before Han ever walked free, serving hundreds of children Michelle had never stopped believing in, even during the months she wasn't sure she believed in much else. If a story about choosing truth over fear, and love over control, is one you needed tonight, I hope you'll stay for the ones still to come. The day Han was released, he arrived without a driver, without security, without a single thing that used to announce who he was before anyone asked. Just a man in a plain coat, standing outside a building full of children's laughter, waiting to see if the woman inside still wanted him there. Michelle stepped outside when someone told her he'd come, and for a moment neither of them moved, the same distance between them that had existed since a kitchen table years ago, except neither of them was hiding anything in it now. She reached into her pocket and held out her palm. Her original wedding ring sat there, the one she'd placed in his trembling hand the night she walked out, the one he'd kept through every hearing, every loss, every night he wasn't sure he deserved to keep it at all. "I'm not asking you to put it on me," she said quietly. "I'm asking if you still want to choose this. Choose me, not to protect me, just because you want to." Han looked at the ring, then at her, and for the first time in his life, he didn't reach to control anything at all. "Will you choose me again?" he asked instead. Michelle smiled and picked up the ring herself, sliding it back onto her own finger without waiting for him to place it there. Because some choices only mean something when you make them yourself. Later that week, they reopened the expanded center together, ribbon cut, children running through rooms that used to be empty with bad lighting and good bones. One small girl tugged on Han's sleeve during the celebration, looking up at him with the kind of curiosity only children still carry. "What did you used to do?" she asked. "Before you came here?" Han glanced at Michelle first, the way he always would now, before he answered anything that mattered. "I spent years learning what love wasn't," he said. "Now I'm learning what it is." The little girl seemed satisfied with that, and ran off toward the paint tables without waiting for more, the way children do when an answer feels true, even if they don't understand all of it yet. Michelle slipped her hand into his, the way she had the night he burned everything he thought defined him, and neither of them needed the silence explained. Outside, the city moved on the way cities do, indifferent to the two imperfect people standing in a doorway they'd both once believed they'd never share again, choosing, quietly and without anyone's permission but their own, the same future.